Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Real Talk with Rick podcast. All things Eden Prairie. So we've actually, we've been on a little bit of a hiatus. We took a couple months off here at the end of the year into the new year. I think the last episode we had was with our outgoing city council member, Brad Aho, right around Thanksgiving, I think it was, or before Thanksgiving. But maybe we'll say now, looking back, that the hiatus was for those of you that want to catch up on the previous podcasts. I think we've done almost 40 of these now. And I would say that if you look back, I would use the word somewhat timeless. I think some of these previous podcasts of people that live or work in Eden Prairie, in and around Eden Prairie, these episodes are about these individuals. And even if the episode, happens to deal with our city building official, our city finance manager, our utilities manager, our snowplow driver, our city property assessor, that whether that was a episode of Real Talk with Rick from a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I think it's still relevant to what these people do in the community of Eden Prairie. So go back and listen to some of those. The episodes are about those individuals and what they do. I'm sure there's some discussion we have that might be related to that date and time in which we did the episode, but it's still relevant. So this episode is City Assistant Fire Chief, Fire Chief Kurt Buchanan, Assistant Chief of Training and Prevention in the fire department. So Kurt talks about a little bit more. We've had the chief on, Chief Gerber on, but Kurt talks about the fire department and specifically the work that's done in his division with training and inspections and prevention, and about how Kurt actually came to the fire service later in life, past the age of 40. So here is my discussion with Eden Prairie Fire Department Assistant Chief Kurt Buchanan. All right, Kurt Buchanan, Eden Prairie Fire Department, welcome. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Rick, for the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Awesome. So, Kurt, could you tell us what your title is and your role in our Eden Prairie Fire Department?
Yeah, sure. I'm the Assistant Chief of Fire Prevention and Training. So I have the responsibility for 4 inspectors that work full-time for the city, as well as a full-time training captain that we coordinate not only our recruit training, but we also coordinate the weekly training that we give to firefighters on that weekly basis.
Yeah, and if we think about the fire department as a whole, and then I'm going to drill down into your team that you cover, in the terms of the department as a whole, we have the 3 chiefs that are full-time, and then the chief, Scott, who's been on here a few times, and then yourself and Ward Parker, and then we have another chief who's paid on call, my namesake, Rick, another Rick, and then you talked about the full-time inspectors who also respond to fire calls, but actually, and people may or may not know this, but the vast majority of our department are paid on call people. They're people that this is kind of a part-time job and they have other full-time jobs.
That's correct. We have that 9 people that respond, full-time. But as you said, we have 94 other members that are part of our duty crew model. And they're staying and living at the fire station after 5 o'clock until 8 o'clock the next morning, and then on weekends. And we rotate between stations so that we have 2 stations on at any given time. The next night it goes to the opposite 2 stations for coverage of the city.
Yeah. And then in terms of, you talked about training and inspections. So when we think about training, what's the commitment? I mean, what's the probably amount of time that the typical Eden Prairie firefighter spends in training?
So training, like I said, we offer weekly. So in a quarter, those folks can actually get, 12 trainings, which would be 36 hours of training that's available. They're required to do 27 hours, which is 9 of those training units. And we provide the opportunity to not only do those in person, but some are outside trainings that they get credit for. We have some online training. Actually, last year...
Probably a lot more online lately, right?
Last year has been predominantly all online training virtual, which has been a new twist for the fire service that has traditionally been all in, hands-on type training because that's the nature of our job. And we've had to be really creative in doing that. And I believe all members of our fire department are anxious to get back to doing hands-on training again.
Oh, absolutely. We are. I mean, and I think having been there on some of those Thursdays, that there's training that you can have where someone's explaining something and you're watching something, you're reading something, videos, content, but there's also the kind of training that you physically, in terms of firefighting, that you want to do, right?
Yeah.
That you want to actually, have to touch.
Yeah, and the majority of it is have to touch to demonstrate the skills that you have. And I will pay tribute to, or hats off to, our Hennepin County medical team that does our EMS training. They've become really creative with ways to socially distance while doing CPR.
Okay.
And doing some of our training so that we get that live touch, but do it in a safe manner.
Sure. Yeah, masked and distanced, and in a good place. Yeah. So let's talk about the division that you oversee, inspections. Talk a little bit about what that group does.
So our inspectors are actually fire prevention specialists by title. Because not only do they do fire inspections, they do fire education, prevention type education, and they also do our fire investigations. So they're wearing multiple hats. And as you said, Rick, they're also riding the trucks in response. So you'll see them out on the scene as well. Those inspectors right now are pushing through about 2,500 inspections a year. We have 10,000 occupancies that are buildings and businesses that we have slated, and that includes residential single-family as well as multifamily residential rental properties. And it's a challenge to get around to the city on a regular basis, and that's probably our biggest challenge. We had to take a period of time off last year for about 3 months where we weren't doing any inspections because of COVID. Our team has really answered the call and have caught back in most cases, are caught up with our goals and our targets. But we still are not getting into every rental unit like we'd like to due to COVID, but we look in the future to do that.
Yeah.
And we're only adding more facilities that we're having to inspect with all the new construction around Eden Prairie as well.
Yeah, we are. There's quite a bit of construction occurring, but I think it's a great distinction that you make to rental inspections. So, someone may think, fire department, fire inspections, that maybe that just means that you're going into restaurants or commercial businesses to do a certain fire inspection. But no, that's true, but also the division inspects a certain percentage of every single rental unit in the city, and people who rent units, even if it's a single-family home or a large apartment building, they need to get a license from the city. And that includes inspections when you first get the license, and then kind of on an ongoing basis. I think the idea is, when you talked about the number of units we have in the community and how many we do, I think the hope is we get through every unit every 4 or 5 years.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That is the target and the goal. And like you said, we do require an annual permit for those who are renting a property. And then our inspections team shares that activity to ensure that we get into those facilities. And our intent is to try to get there every 4 to 5 years. We're still not as good as we want to be, but we're working to build efficiencies and effectiveness in our processes to meet that goal.
No, you really have kind of stepped up the game, I think, in the last year or so. I see the numbers in terms of inspections, but also and this sometimes gets, to me as well, is you'll get complaints. You'll get calls and complaints about concerns from a renter that the landlord might not be keeping up the property to the fullest extent. I mean, besides it's time for your inspection, you guys follow up on all those calls and complaints, whether it's, again, a single-family home or an apartment unit.
Yeah, our inspectors do a really good job of answering those complaints. We also engage our building inspectors when needed, to try to resolve some of those issues between the tenant and the rental property owner.
Yeah, no, it's you guys are doing quite a bit of good work, and you're right. I think about currently under construction, I think there's 5 different multifamily housing units as we're talking right now. So yeah, we are adding units. Yeah,
it's definitely impressive to look at the landscape and the skyline to see the differences of some of the big multifamily units that are being put in place, and that will add to our workload. But our inspectors are up to the challenge.
Yeah, no, and so before, I get a little bit into kind of you personally and what led you to want to do this full time, because there is a time when you were part time with the department as well. When you think about the industry, maybe it's fire service overall, what have you seen that's kind of changed in the last decade or so?
When I look at firefighting, I think the biggest change that's really at the top of the list today is firefighter wellness. Not only cancer prevention, but mental wellness, as well as heart or physical wellness. It's really come to the surface that we are losing firefighters that are either in career or end of career to one of those 3 causes. And the fire service has really stepped up to the plate to make us aware. Eden Prairie has done a fantastic job of providing good PPE, good protocols with cleaning our gear. We have gear extractors, gear dryers. We have 2 sets of gear for every firefighter so that when we get back, it's the clean cab concept where we're taking showers and changing. It's no longer the badge of honor to wear dirty, soot-filled gear anymore. We've also added, our exhaust systems for our diesel trucks, which was found to be a cause of firefighter cancer with starting and stopping vehicles in the station. So definitely a lot of activity around that, and I think that's probably been one of the biggest changes.
Yeah, no doubt about it, because when people think about firefighter health and well-being, they think about an injury or something that happens at a fire. Yep. Everything you're talking about is related to not being on, it's not inside an active fire scene.
Yeah,
it's outside of that, and it's the materials and the particles and the chemicals.
Yeah, and in today's environment of what's burning in our houses are all synthetics, all give off more toxins. They burn hotter. Time in fires is really limited based on lightweight construction. Those are all changes we've had to deal with on how we respond. But I think it is really that after the fire's out and that longevity and the focus on what firefighters are doing today so that they can enjoy retirement, that they can have a healthy career, because we are definitely seeing the firefighter death and impact not on the scene. It's really about the years of having that exposure and what they've seen, et cetera, that they have to deal with.
Like you talked about the cancers.
Yes.
That develop. No, that is definitely an industry trend as well. And then what about that mental preparation? I mean, I sometimes think about that when we talk about police officers, when you could, at one moment, you're just kind of sitting in a pretty casual environment, and then the next minute the adrenaline's going to start flowing. So is there some kind of mental preparation or
I think for me, Rick, it's more of I take that step back quickly and try to take that breath and look at what's my past experiences been, where am I going, do I know where I'm going, what type of call it is, kind of painting the picture in your mind of what you're potentially going to. And yeah, you're surprised at times. I think the more you do this, or the longer you do this job, you get more of a zen or comfort level, especially for structure fires.
Yeah.
Being new for the first 4 to 5 years, you're all excited, and it's like the first time you've been on the truck. And as you grow in experience and knowledge, it becomes more relaxed. You rely on your training. You rely on your coworkers. And it is definitely, in my mind, a team effort. It's not an individual task. It's always based on others working with you to accomplish the task.
Yeah. So what, in terms of that, are there certain types of calls that just you still recall years later? What would be some of the ones that still jump out to you?
For me, it's the first fire that I went to.
Okay. And what was that?
That was building in Shadow Greens. We had a porch fire caused by discarded smoking materials. That unit did not have sprinklers in the unit, and basically we lost the third floor due to the fire. And I was new. I had another firefighter with me that was new. And Chief Parker, I think, was a lieutenant at the time, left us at the top of the stairwell with a hose that was not charged.
Uh-oh.
And he went off to do something else, and we're watching the fire grow, and finally he yells down the hallway, "Get him to charge the line, use your radio." So part of it is you remember those days because, you're kind of left in a situation to have to figure it out. We kind of laugh at it today.
Oh,
Hopefully I've never done that, but I'm sure I have. But there's other ones that have more deeper feelings that you'll never forget. You remember certain aspects of calls that, I think it's the medicals that you go to with young people, or I had one on a Thanksgiving day that did not turn out the way I wanted it to, or that we would have hoped.
Yeah.
And what's unique is I've had 2 other events after that were closure events with a property owner years later, and then another family member came to me during my Halloween display.
Okay.
And started talking. He says, "Aren't you the firefighter that came to my house on Thanksgiving?" And so that helped me heal. But I still remember it.
Yeah. And what was that? You say closure event. So what was the time frame? Was that a long time later?
The first time was a year later.
A year later.
At a mortgage closing, which things happen in strange ways, I think. And it was the owner of the property that we were at that put 2 and 2 together based on my application, and we had a moment of crying at the table, and I think it was a healing moment. And then just last year, which is probably 7 years, that the family member came by and made that comment. And
wow.
And it really evolved around, "Thank you. We couldn't ask for more. You were there quickly."
Yeah.
And even though the outcome wasn't what we expected, it helps with some of that. But I think you're always going to remember some of those calls.
Well, and I started the question with how you mentally prepare for the call. Well, there's also how you deal with what you see and, process and manage. And, there should be good mental health support for those situations.
And I think that is a strength of Eden Prairie. We have EAP available. Every one of our chiefs reached out to me on that call, that specific call. When we have tough calls, we have definitely a support structure amongst our fellow firefighters. We also know MinFire has hotlines now that allow you to be able to debrief and de-stress, and I think those are huge because I think everyone has those calls and everyone has those moments where they need to reach out and talk about things.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, in terms of types of calls. We know this, that the vast majority of calls for the fire department are not fires. They're medical calls. So you are there to help people. And there are a lot of medical calls that, someone may not even need a transport somewhere, but a lot of times they do. But a lot of times you're dealing with that. Those are most of your calls, right?
Yeah. But there are some other unique calls that I think we offer some assistance that our residents probably don't think we do.
Okay.
Recently we've had this cold spell, and we have furnaces that go out, people that are traveling, people who are at home. And we either have sprinkler systems that freeze up and fail. We get the call directly then. But often we'll get a call from our police department asking for an assist to make entry into a house that's flooding. And often we find that it's the potable water system that's frozen because the heat's out.
Okay.
And so we make every effort to shut the water system down, contact the owners, contact the property management company, do the best we can to try to get some of that water out of their homes. But also we focus on, making sure the homeowner knows what to do for next steps. So it's really about, caring for the residents of Eden Prairie. The other thing is we do rescue cats out of trees. And I've been on at least three. I've been on at least three calls. And I think, I would have said 5 years ago that would never happen, but I've been on multiple since then. And it is true.
Okay, so do you have to bring the ladder truck and the ladder goes up the tree? Typically it's a portable ladder we'll take up and we'll climb up the tree. And we also have had the case with a cat, when we brought it down, went right back up the tree, so we didn't retrieve that cat the second time. But usually it's fire crews throwing the ladder up and grabbing the cat. So you get the cat, and I would love to see a video of this. This would be a good video that we could put in the city website of the the cat goes up the tree, you get the cat, and I'm just picturing you going, "Nope, we're done. That's it." What'd the owner say? Please go back up there again.
And it's like, they'll come down when they're ready. So I think many of our firefighters have some similar stories.
Cats up the tree.
Cats up a tree, or rescue a dog, or those types of.
Yeah, no, we've had recently we had the police with the eagle, the bald eagle. I mean, it's a lot of stuff, rescuing different types of wildlife from manholes and sewers and storm sewers. We've done a lot of that stuff. But the cat from the tree, of course, the cat from the tree.
The other thing I think that residents don't realize is we have an airport here.
Yeah.
And so we are trained and prepared for in-flight emergencies as well as we've responded to multiple plane crashes over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And so there is some activity there, ice rescue, water rescue.
Yes.
I think lost people, children.
Yes.
And adults. And so we provide assistance to our police department to do those types of activities as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I'm thinking in my time here, I don't. Have there been calls recently related to ice or water rescue? That I can't think of that many.
There have not been many recently.
Yeah.
We had over the couple years, we had a car in Lake Riley that we got a call on. It was just an open ice call.
Yeah.
So it then became a vehicle recovery. A few years back, we had a couple dogs that we rescued from the ice, but fortunately, we don't have many.
No, it does happen, and like you said, it's not anything that's going to make the TV news. It's just that you might have a car in the ice or a certain situation. I want to talk about you a little bit. When you think about this this work, what kind of led you to say you'd want to be a part of a city fire department?
So I'd have to say I've always been fascinated with firefighting since even being a teenager.
Where'd you grow up? Maybe go back there.
Yeah, so I was raised. I actually was born in Youngstown, Ohio. Raised in Boardman, Ohio, which is south of Youngstown. For those listening, Youngstown is approximately halfway between Cleveland, Ohio, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So more on the eastern side of Ohio. Steel mill country. Was a leading steel mill manufacturer till 1975, and then everything crashed after that. Yeah. And so very much a blue-collar work upbringing. Family of 4 other siblings and parents. Father was a self-taught electrical engineer, GED, was in the Navy for 9 years during the war. And I really thank him for my work ethic and what I am today. But I chose to follow in his footsteps as an electrical engineer. So I graduated from Youngstown State University with a bachelor's in electrical engineering. Kathy and I moved to Midland, Michigan for Dow Chemical right after graduation. We spent 16 great years in the state of Michigan in multiple places. And then we got the opportunity to move to the center of the earth, which we thought was Minneapolis.
Yeah.
We had been living in the thumb of Michigan, which we thought was the end of the earth. Very small country location. And we moved back to a plant here in Edina, which is Dow Water Process Solutions, which is a water purification development company. So clean water around the world. And when we moved, our realtor really was instrumental in bringing us to Eden Prairie, and was very high on what Eden Prairie had to offer, and we could not be happier. Our two kids, got their education from Eden Prairie schools, and had ventured off into other great opportunities. So the school systems are great. We love the parks. We love the what Eden Prairie has to offer. We came for 3 years, and we've been here 21 years now. So definitely a place that we want to be.
No, that's great. And so Youngstown, you grew up there, went to high school there, and stayed for college.
Yes.
Because that's all. What's the population? Because it's a decent-sized city.
Yeah, I think at its peak it was about 75,000 originally. And then it went to about 40,000 in about a month. So it definitely changed when the steel mills left.
So how old were you when that happened?
So that would have been 75. I would have been sophomore, junior, and I would have been, let me think, 13?
13 or so.
13.
When because obviously, I mean, we had a pretty major recession that came at the end of the 70s, and then you had high inflation. Think about the price of gas. At that time, I was in early elementary school, but I do remember kind of that mid to late 70s period of time. I grew up in eastern Wisconsin, and that's more paper mills, but you were more in steel. But I grew up as this is not something I normally admit, being a huge Packer fan. But when I was real little, I was a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And I remember kind of when, they were in their heyday. They won like several Super Bowls at that time, but they were rallying a city in an area that was being devastated by loss of employment at that time. I think that was what the whole Cleveland, Youngstown, Pittsburgh area.
And what's really unique is I was a Cleveland fan. Brother-in-law's a Pittsburgh, ex-brother-in-law's a Pittsburgh Steeler fan, and another one was a Cincinnati Bengal fan.
Oh, sure.
So we kind of hit all four corners or three corners of the NFL.
Of the state. No, Ohio's fascinating, Kurt, because I went to school in southwestern Ohio, which is near Cincinnati. And there's a big difference between what it's like around the Cincinnati, Kentucky, Indiana border. I went to Miami University in that area. And then I did have friends that were from kind of that northeastern Ohio area. And I drove to visit some friends over long weekends in Columbus, but also in the Cleveland area as well. So that's a big state. There's a lot from one end to the other. But so you all the way through school, but then your employment took you to Michigan, as you said, and then eventually transferred to Minnesota with Dow. And then I don't know if we got to this, but now you're in Eden Prairie, and your realtor found a place here. Why the fire department?
So in 2000 we moved to Eden Prairie. And didn't even realize there was a volunteer firefighter opportunity in Eden Prairie. Thought full-time department because everywhere I come from had full-time departments. And one day in 2004, I was driving past the fire station and I saw the banner that said "Looking for volunteers." And quickly went home, talked with Kathy, and said, "I think I'm going to apply for the fire department." She said, "Sure, right, go ahead," with a lot of skepticism in her voice. I came back after all of the physical tryouts and the tests and so forth that required, and I came home and I said, I'm a firefighter at Eden Prairie now. She had to eat a little crow.
Yeah, because her thing about just go ahead would be you're not going to make it, you're not going to pass.
And she had confidence in me, but she's like, they're not going to want somebody your age, because I believe I was 43.
Yeah.
42, 43 when I applied, and so on the older side, right?
But
I think it was more.
But that's a good story, Kurt, because this idea that young, maybe even young male, that's not the case.
No.
I mean, it's we've been working hard to get females in fire service, people of all ages, all backgrounds.
Yep.
Absolutely, 40 years old, you should be able to join.
Yeah, and I came in with 7 other firefighters in my recruit class, and the majority of us were over 40. So it just shows you that it is doable. And, I think we talked a little bit, Rick, about, you have to be strong to be a firefighter. And I think it's more of, are you physically fit? And can you use technique to do some of this job? It's not necessarily the brute strength that gets you the results.
Yeah. You're proof of that, is what your wife said, right?
Yep, I'm proof of that.
Yeah. Well, so then we talked a lot about what you do and what happens in the department. What's the best part for you? What's the best part of the job?
Definitely helping people. And I think first, helping people to not have the bad day, right, in prevention. The second piece is helping people when they have the bad day. And we can't fix it all, but hopefully we make it a little better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about your children, but you have grandchildren too?
I do.
Yeah.
I have 5 grandchildren.
5 grandchildren. What do they think about Grandpa the firefighter?
The 3 that are older, 11 and going on 8, they think it's fascinating when they come to visit. We always have to take and make a trip to the fire department. My 17-month-old grandson who lives in Chaska, his dad is also a firefighter with Eden Prairie. And he is infatuated with playing with fire trucks and watching fire truck videos. Okay. And so starting him young, and hopefully he'll follow in Grandpa's and Dad's footsteps.
Yeah, absolutely, when the time comes. Well, and you'll still be on the department then.
Yeah.
So for you, Kurt, what's an ideal vacation getaway for you? It doesn't have to be COVID; it can be non-COVID too, because I know everyone's having to adjust.
Better. Yeah. So my idea of vacation is somewhere warm, balmy. That way, our significant others can enjoy the beach, the sun, and they'll allow us to go off and fish. I'm a big advocate of ocean fishing, offshore fishing. It's actually spoiled me for any in-lake fishing now or inland water type fishing because of size and and the uncertainty of and the variety of what you can catch. So I have a brother-in-law and I that are very close friends that fish a lot, and so I would look at my bucket list is Australia, Hawaii, and Tahiti. Wow. to go for marlin, tuna, mahi-mahi, those type of game fish.
Yeah, you're not talking like big lake fishing. You're talking ocean.
Yes.
Wow. And so you've done some of that on have you been on the Atlantic and Pacific?
I've done fishing in both for many, many years.
Yeah.
I fished in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta. We caught a 9.5-foot sailfish there. So once you get the get it in your blood, it's hard to get it out. So that's my ideal vacation.
Do you still hit the land of 10,000 lakes fishing though, just to keep
occasionally?
If it's not okay.
Occasionally,
if it's not
but
the ocean.
Not,
all right.
It's like I said. My brother-in-law says the same thing. He's got a lake on his property, and he said just something about the ocean fishing has taken the zeal away from catching the small fish.
Fair enough. So what what are some other things you like to do when in your spare time or not on vacation? What are some of your other interests?
Family is probably the number one. I think as you age, you find out that what's really important in life is the time you spend with your family, your grandkids. We are cherishing the fact that we have 2 grandkids that live close by. our other three live far enough away. Two are in Montana, one's in California. That just makes it tough to see them on a regular basis. And so we are really enjoying the 17-month and the 1-month-olds that live in Chaska. So spend a lot of time with my lovely spouse, 36 years worth, and very proud of that. And she's the hero in the fire service in my mind, and so are all the other spouses, significant others. They pay the price for all the hours that you spend servicing the residents of Eden Prairie. So they get a lot of credit in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's good to mention that. Before we came on, before we started taping, we were just getting ready and getting set up. You and Johnny were talking a little bit about music. So you're also a fan of classic rock, right?
Yep.
Like what? Tell me like your top. What are some of your favorites?
So I was big into high school with the Cars.
Oh yeah.
We talked a little bit about Journey, and
Hey, by the way, the Cars. Did they come out of Michigan or Ohio? Maybe not. Maybe they were New York.
I think they're out of New York.
Okay, maybe it was New York.
Steve Perry out of Journey, we were talking a little bit about, and we had that discussion, and I went back and played some of the old music, and we had the discussion on how we interpret it differently or think about music differently than we did. Journey was big when I was in high school, and I know I wore the vinyl off the albums. I was just listening last night to Faithfully, and they were talking about how they're away from home, away from their families, and that their spouses and their family members are holding down the fort, and how they respected that their other half, right? And I that just aligned real well with me on the fire service side. That there's someone on the other side faithfully keeping down the fort while our folks are out doing things good for the residents of Eden Prairie.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the comment was when we're 15, 16, 17 and we're listening to Journey or REO Speedwagon or any classic rock, you weren't thinking about some of that. And then later on, you listen to it 30, 40 years later. I mean, there were so many songs that those groups wrote about touring and being on the road and how hard it is. Well, when I'm 16, I don't care. I don't. If it's like fun music, it's. But there's a lot of difficulty in terms of what was being written about that you might interpret differently 40, 50 years later.
Right.
Now, Johnny, he's a big fan of Kiss. You can't really interpret Kiss music. Like 40 years later, there's no other way to interpret Kiss music. Maybe Journey, maybe REO. Fleetwood Mac, that's true. I mean, that was like the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album that came out in like 1976 was like the biggest record of that year by far. And you were talking about that was about the time you were a freshman in high school.
Yep.
That was huge.
Pink Floyd was a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Led Zeppelin.
Yep.
So I got to tell you one last story.
Yes.
My son, when he was in high school, said, "Hey, Dad, I got to tell you about a new group." And he said, "I heard this new group called Led Zeppelin."
Yeah,
and
right.
I said, "Well, not so new, but it's amazing how generations pick up the same music that we've listened to."
Well, I can't remember which rapper it was. I'll think of it if I have a long enough period of time. But Paul McCartney did like a little bit on a rapper's record that my kids were like, "Oh, there's this Paul McCartney guy," on Childish Gambino's record or whatever. I'm like, you just don't understand. They do now. They're old. That was when they're younger. They actually listen like to the Beatles now. Just like you said, your kid. Did you say, "Hey, there's like 4 albums, Led Zeppelin 1, 2, 3, and 4, and there's a couple more beyond that," and get him into that? That's awesome.
Yeah, he today he still listens to that group. So
yeah, so I have vinyl, and so Eddie Van Halen just passed away.
Yeah,
if you like Van Halen, so I get a couple of the older Van Halen records out and listen to them that I hadn't listened to in a long time. So maybe that gets people out to listen to some of that.
Yeah,
but Led Zeppelin though.
Yeah, good group.
Yeah. Well, Kurt, are any famous last words before we
just I appreciate having the discussion.
Yeah.
I really value working for the city, living in the city, and and supporting the residents of the city.
No, it's great to have you on board. You've meant a lot to the department over the last 20 years, and then also being now one of our chiefs. So we're grateful to have you give yourself to the city and be a part of what we're doing here. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah.